Let's talk about a really weird day in the markets. Monday, September 15th, 2025. This was one of those days where the numbers, the cold hard data, said one thing, but traders, well, they did the complete opposite.
And that brings us to the biggest puzzle of all. It's a question that honestly seems to defy all logic. How on earth does news of the biggest corn crop in U.S. history actually make prices go up? To figure this one out, we've got to dig into the data, sure, but more importantly, we have to get inside the heads of the traders.
All right, so the whole story really kicks off the Friday before. The U.S. government drops this bombshell of a report, one that, by all rights, should have sent corn prices into an absolute nosedive. And here's the number that was supposed to do it: 16.8 billion bushels. That's what the U.S. Department of Agriculture was projecting for the 2025 corn crop. I mean, just try to wrap your head around that much grain. It's almost unimaginable. And to put that in perspective, we're not just talking about inching past the old record. No, this projection was for a crop a full 10% larger than the previous all-time high. This wasn't just a record, it was an absolute monster crop. And this is where it gets bizarre. The data was screaming bearish. More supply should mean lower prices. It's economics 101. But what happened? After a tiny little dip, traders started buying like crazy, and corn prices actually went up. The market flat out refused to believe the numbers.
So what gives? What were the traders seeing out in the fields that the official government report was missing? This is where you get that classic clash between the view from the spreadsheet and the view from, well, the real world.
This quote from an analyst just nails the feeling on the trading floor. The market looked at the report and basically said, yeah, we don't think so. This is something called a fundamental rejection, and it's when the price action just completely ignores what the official data says it should be doing.
Okay, so let's break down why they were so skeptical. For one, traders with boots on the ground had seen how dry it was in August. They'd heard all the chatter about crop disease spreading. On top of that, a lot of people felt the market had already sold off, that a big harvest was already priced in. But the real kicker? There was this nagging suspension that budget cuts at the USDA meant their data just wasn't as reliable as it used to be. Now, this argument in the American corn belts, it didn't just stay there. Oh no. The uncertainty started sending these waves all across the globe, setting off a chain reaction that hit everything from cooking oil in India to crude oil prices. So while the corn traders were busy arguing with the USDA, the soybean traders were watching something totally different: politics. You had US and Chinese officials meeting, but it seemed like all they wanted to talk about was tech stuff, not agriculture. And for soybean farmers, that's a huge problem, right? With China, their #1 customer, still sitting on the sidelines, the market was getting really nervous about weak demand. And all that drama around US soy has an immediate knock-on effect for massive importers like India. See, India is the world's biggest buyer of vegetable oils, which means they are super sensitive to price. They will always, always hunt for the best deal they can find. So what was the result? Bam. India's palm oil imports shot up to a 1-year high. And why? It was simple. It was cheaper than soy oil. With their big festival season coming up, Indian refiners just followed the price, completely shifting their buying habits because of a trade dispute happening thousands of miles away.
Meanwhile, at the very same time, another huge global story was breaking. Ukraine had just launched this massive wave of drone strikes aimed right at Russia's energy infrastructure, and one of them hit. A fire broke out at the Kirishi refinery, a place that pushes out over 350,000 barrels a day. The fear of that supply getting disrupted sent global crude oil prices climbing immediately. And the volatility wasn't just in grains and energy. If we head back to the US, the cattle market was on an absolute roller coaster, which just goes to show you how wild and unpredictable the whole day was. The price action was so nuts, one analyst just called it wax on, wax off. Feeder cattle futures got hammered on Friday, losing as much as $7. But then on Monday, they came roaring all the way back. The market was just swinging violently from fear to greed and back again. So what's fueling this madness? Well, it's this epic tug of war. On one side, you have a historically tight supply of cattle. There just aren't enough animals to go around. But on the other side, people's demand for beef is as strong as ever, and wholesale prices, what they call boxed beef, just keep climbing. It's a classic battle of supply versus demand, and it's creating all this volatility. Okay,
So, after a day of paradoxes in the cornfields, global ripples, and roller coasters in the cattle pits, what's the big picture? What are we supposed to take away from all this chaos?
When you step back and look at the whole board, you can see how every market was kind of in its own little world. You had corn traders arguing about the weather, you had cattle ranchers fixated on tight supply, and halfway around the globe, oil traders were reacting to drone strikes. It was like every market was marching to the beat of its own drum, driven by its own unique story. If there's one single thing to pull from September 15th, it's this: data is only part of the equation. On this day, the story that traders were telling themselves, a story about bad weather, sketchy reports, and tight supplies, that story was way, way more powerful than any number on a government report. And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to chew on. In this age where we are drowning in data, where we have more facts and figures at our fingertips than ever before, how much of what happens is really decided not by the facts, but by whichever story we find most convincing.